Hello, everyone. Dave Gulas back again with a special edition of the Beyond Fulfillment podcast on Trump's impact on the supply chain. I'm back with a couple guests this week. Number one, my good friend Jim Tompkins. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Dave.
Hi. And also this week with us, we have Grant Sernick, who is with Third Wave, which is a platform that helps international shippers with all the regulations and whatnot that they need help with when importing in the United States. And Grant is based in Canada. Welcome, Grant.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, Jim. Nice to be here.
Good to see you, Grant.
So for the audience, what we're looking to do is just have a little bit of a further impactful discussion on these recent trade slash tariff negotiations, particularly between the U.S. and Canada, as well as Mexico, and China's also in the fold, and really talk about what it means for business owners, particularly in North America, as they're trying to navigate all this uncertainty with trade these days and what the real world implications and consequences of these tariffs actually are and how it relates to them. So let's start. So each of you wrote basically an essay, or I guess you could say a blog post in the past several days. So I just want to give each of you just a moment to kind of summarize the thoughts behind that for the audience. So Jim, you wrote one, and it was titled "Why Canada and Mexico Should Avoid a Trade War."
So thank you, Dave, and I hope I remember that blog specifically. I think I've written three since then. But the overall topic that Grant and I want to discuss today is what's going on with respect to what they're calling a trade war. And the United States has a real problem. We have a huge trade deficit of 1.2 trillion last year. We're having a hard time balancing our budget. In fact, we're spending more money than we're taking in by a large amount. And so there's a problem. And so President Trump was elected with a mandate of shoring up things and making things happen that are different. President Trump has been clear his favorite word in the dictionary is the word tariff. And so he believes that he can use tariffs to shore up the world. And so if we're looking at Canada versus the United States in this discussion, we could look at the size of the economy. The size of the US economy is 29 trillion. The size of the Canadian economy is 2 trillion. So Canada is about 7% of the size of the US. And so I conclude from that that the Canadians need the US more than the US needs the Canadians. But we're not going to get into that because the Canadians are our friends, the Mexicans are our friends, and North America is important to all three countries, Canada, US, and Mexico. If we look at the amount of trade that takes place between North America, we find out that the largest trading partner in the world for the United States is Mexico at 840 billion. The second largest is Canada at 762 billion. So Canada is our second largest trading partner in the world. Third is China at 582. And so these are the three that get highlighted most. And as you said in the introduction, Dave, it's a Canada, Mexico, China type of discussion. Now, the issue that we need to deal with respect to trade is the trade deficit, the worst trade deficit in the world. And therefore, the major objective of Trump is to get China straight because China is at $295 billion in 2024. That's 25% of our overall $1.2 trillion trade deficit. Second place there is Mexico at 171 billion. And then way down in ninth place, so by no means the worst offender at all, is Canada at 63 billion. And so China is 25% of our total trade deficit in 2024. Canada is 5%. So Canada is a much less significant problem. However, 63 billion is a problem. An interesting thing to look at is to see how we got here. And if we go back, I went back 10 years to 2015, the U.S. had a deficit with Canada of 38 billion. That number traveled between a low of 25 and a high of 36 from 2016 up until 2020. And so we ran a substantial negative deficit between 2015 and 2020. In 2020, President Trump, President 45, renegotiated with the Canadians and the Mexicans a new NAFTA agreement, which they call the USCMA tariff agreement or agreement, USMCA agreement. And in that agreement, they adjusted multiple tariffs with the objective of having free and fair trade. In 2021, the year after it was implemented, the surplus the U.S. ran positive was 0.17 billion or 170 million. And so very close to a break even, which was the objective. In 2022, that surplus from the United States grew to 2.84 billion. And so the United States made up almost 3 billion of the over, I don't know, what was it, 180 billion that they blew between 2015 and 2020. So they made up 3 billion of it. But then in 2023, it went to 8.4 billion. In 2024, it went to 63 billion, the largest it's been ever. And so there's a huge trade deficit, 63 billion. Now it's not the China thing, but the trade deficit is substantial. It has grown. The folks that sat down in 2020 and renegotiated the NAFTA contract to come up with the new USMCA, they did not accomplish their objectives. And Canada got a sweetheart deal, and the US paid for that. And so now the objective is to kind of balance that up. This discussion is actually going to begin on April 2nd, when there's a reciprocal tariff that'll be defined by the United States. There will be a response to that. In fact, I don't think it matters who the players are. Every time there's, one party says this is fair, and then the other party retaliates, and then they sit down and have a negotiation. So far, what we're seeing is that Canada has been saying, no, we're going to push back. We're going to, every dollar you tariff us, we're going to dollar tariff you. And that's not, I don't think that's good negotiation. At the same time, President Trump has ruffled some feathers with his 51st state nonsense and his Governor Trudeau stuff. And that's, just irritating, and it irritates everyone. But that's, the personality we're dealing with. So I think where we are right now is we're kind of the calm before the storm. April 2nd, the storm is going to happen. And, we got the U.S. guys and the Canadian guys, ready to duke it out. I actually think what's going to happen is that the tariffs that actually come out April 2nd are going to be much less than what's been thrown around to date. And then there's going to be some good negotiation. Nick, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, has already been in discussions with the Canadians. There seems to be a relatively open discussion going on. And so I think what's really important is that we keep our cool. We remember that we're dealing with our friends, and we get the best deal we can. And we'll put up our negotiator, and Canada will put up their negotiator, and let's see what happens. I hope it turns out to be good for everyone. But I think, given the recent past, the U.S. needs to get a little sweeter deal than the Canadians do. So that's where I think we are.
Okay. Appreciate that, Jim. And we'll get into expand on some of those points here in a minute. So Grant, all right. Appreciate you being here. you recently wrote a post, and it's titled "A Different Perspective on Canada and Mexico's Trade Response." And really, part of it was no one wins a trade war, but that's not the point. Can you just summarize kind of your position through that post, where you see that we are?
Yeah, of course. And again, thank you for having me. And it's always great to be on these kind of shows. And I have a great deal of respect for Jim. So, um, well, we had this back and forth on LinkedIn. And for those of you that are interested, Jim does a lot of writing on LinkedIn, as many of you probably know. I do as well. And generally speaking, I'm writing on international trade and importing and companies that import and things of that nature. So you can follow me there. I have a weekly newsletter, as I don't know if Jim's is weekly, but sort of periodically at least. And yeah, so I think Jim did a great job of setting the table for what sort of objectively what the facts are, and that basically, I don't dispute anything that he said as far as the numbers, right? Um, where my overarching comment is that one of the challenges that exists, that we have just in from an analysis perspective, is that it's easy to look at the U.S. and the various trade wars that they are going down with, Canada, Mexico, China, Europe, all, and the rest of the world, as the same problem with the same strategy. And I actually don't believe that that's the case. I think that um, Jim's categorization that this really is about a trade deficit. Um, I don't I don't think that that's true. It's certainly not as it relates to Canada. I think that generally speaking, his point, and he, Trump does a very, very bad job of making his points from my perspective. He operates in sound bites. What a trade deficit represents is that you are buying more elsewhere than you are making domestically. And I think that the U.S. has a problem, that they have declined globally in their manufacturing capabilities. It's not zero, and it's not even close to zero. They're still the second largest manufacturer in the world, but they used to be the largest, and it wasn't even close. And where they're manufacturing in aerospace and automotive and things are pretty high end manufacturing capabilities. And the problem is that these manufacturing jobs that have largely left the United States were mid-level manufacturing jobs that Joe Blow from Middle America could work in a factory, earn a middle-class wage, and have a very good life. Many of those jobs have gone away, and as a result, Trump, I believe rightly, understands that he needs to bring many of those jobs back to the United States. And so the question is, okay, well, how do you articulate that? He says, well, we have a trade deficit and trade deficits are bad and blah, blah, blah. And he goes on about that. So if that's the case, then you have to look at Canada and say, okay, well, what is going on in Canada? And is that truly the problem in Canada? And Jim is exactly right. The US has a trade deficit with Canada, except if you take out oil and energy, which is a primary input to anything that you need to do, the US actually has a trade surplus. Okay. And then if you go beyond that to look at energy and where is the energy coming from, you'll find that much of the northeast of the United States is powered by hydroelectric power that Canada has and sells to the United States at a very, very high discount to what the market rate is. And so, it's easy to say, yes, trade deficit equals bad, and we need to rectify that. But the U.S. gets a lot of I think 90% of the natural gas imports come from Canada. Yes, the U.S. has a huge natural gas reserve. I think it only represents 7 or 8% of the total natural gas consumption in the United States, but it's non-zero. And Similarly, the crude oil that comes from the oil sands in Canada is a net benefit to the US. We send it to the US, that gets refined in the US, and then it comes back to Canada. Sometimes some of it comes back to Canada as refined petroleum products. Um, those are things that the oftentimes the US can't manufacture on its own, and then you look at things like potash. And while it might be nice to think that the US can manufacture their own potash, the US just doesn't have the reserves to make the potash that is required. And so my point is that the US, I think 90% of potash that is imported or that is consumed in the it's 25, the US imports 90% of its potash, 25% of that is from Canada. The US isn't manufacturing its own potash. You don't have the reserves and whatever. And so it is totally counterproductive. And really the thrust of my article was, yes, nobody wins in a trade war. Canada certainly can lose big time. And the question ultimately is, so from Canada's perspective, what is the appropriate response? Is it to sit back and just let, the US dump on it? Or is it more appropriate to understand that a negotiated settlement really is the way to go? There are very significant pain points that the US could, or that Canada could inflict on the US, notwithstanding we're a fraction of the size. And is that the best strategic way to go for Canada? And, I would argue we ought to be friends. I think part of the issue really is the antagonistic nature that the Trump administration has come to this. And, sort of Trump has sent Lutnick and Lutnick says sort of goon-like things. But it just hasn't been done in a manner in which we have become accustomed to negotiating with our big brother to the south. And I think that is, ultimately one of the big problems, because this USMCA is being renegotiated anyway, immediately, whether Trump wanted to instigate it this way or not. And so anyway, I'll leave it there for now, and I'm happy to hear Jim's response or move on to a different topic.
Okay, so let's understood your position there, and clearly, right, we've heard antagonistic remarks on both sides, right? So I want to ask each of you, right, because like you said, Jim, April 2nd is really when the reciprocal tariffs begin and the game begins, so to speak. And Grant, like you said, the USMCA is already being renegotiated. So when you hear these comments, I mean, do you think, because again, these are all professional politicians. They're used to, the public, doing all this stuff in public. Do you think that a lot of this is more just to gather support from their constituency and from the people, and therefore however they're negotiating, right? There's going to be side effects. It's going to be messy. There may be short-term price increases, whatever we're going to see. Do you think this is more so to drum up like support from the people on each side, or do you think that they're really like anyone's getting emotional about this, in terms of the players that are involved in these negotiations? Jim, let's start with you.
Well, I think most of what Grant said is on target. I think there's two industries within the discussion that are somewhat irrelevant. Anybody who talks about Canadian energy policy or American energy policy or Canadian automotive supply chain or US automotive supply chain, I think is speaking unwisely. There is no such thing as a Canadian energy policy or US energy policy. There is a Canadian US energy policy where our electric grid, our pipelines, their crude, taking that crude and turning it back to them as gasoline. That's a partnership. Automotive, there is no U.S. automotive supply chain. There's no U.S. Canadian automotive supply. There's a North American automotive supply chain. So those things, I don't think should be included in the overall balance of trade, because they're already decided and negotiated as to how they're going to take place. I think on the issue of where we are, I think Trump has been Trump. You know, you can go back and read his book of 20 years ago. You can go back and watch the 4 years when he was number 45, and you know how the man operates. I mean, he is a negotiator, and he's a very good negotiator. I don't think he did so well in 2020. I think he gave up a sweetheart deal to Canada, and I think he feels bad about that now because it didn't turn out the way it was supposed to turn out. And so he's got his his hair up on his collar, and he's concerned about that. But when we, I mean, Grant runs a great business. I run a great business. We always look at who the client is on the other side of the table and try to assess how we're going to position this for a win-win. And you got to know your opponent or know your client or know your enemy, depending upon who's sitting on the other side of the table. And I think the Canadians have totally misplayed this. Pulling all the liquor off the shelves in their liquor stores and all. I mean, you know, come on, guys. This is not even started yet. Why those are going to shut off the electricities to your? So Trump made some speeches, but we haven't been threatening. I mean, we are friends. I mean, let's remember that now. Did Trump want to get rid of Trudeau? I think so. Did Canada want to get rid of Trudeau? I don't know. Grant can tell us. I think so. I don't know. It's not my bailiwick. I certainly haven't made Trudeau since my study, since I learned all about Maggie back when I was a young man. And I thought, oh my goodness, president, the prime minister's wife or whatever it is, what is this going on? But whatever. That's over there, and so I think what Trump should try to act a little more friendly, but good luck, Jim. That ain't going to happen. I mean, Trump is Trump, but I think Canada should just chill and wait until the battle gets started, and then we should have a good discussion. And I'm quite confident that the antagonism is going to go away. Lutnick, my goodness sakes, how can you get mad at him? He smiles all the time. I mean, he's a very happy guy, and he's always smiling. And as the three of us would agree, a short beard is really distinguished. And so, yeah, I mean, he joins the club, and so I think he's a very a good guy to have in this discussion. Mark Carney, who is apparently going to be the next prime minister, or at least that's my understanding after an election and so forth. If you look at what he says, I mean, I didn't do a lot of research on him, but I've read five things about him. Number one, he's really good in a financial crisis. Well, it's a good guy to have at the head of the ship for Canada. He's very interested in a balanced budget. Well, that sounds like the other guy. He wants to reduce government spending. Well, I don't know if he's got an Elon Musk, but Trump does, and we're knocking that one out of the ballpark. He wants to avoid a recession, and he wants to protect Canada. Gee whiz, I kind of, I think if he got a red hat and said, make Canada great again, I think that would be marvelous. And so I don't know much about the guy. I'm not sure how much the Canadians know about him. I guess he's in Europe now, so I'm not sure why he's doing that. But I think it's important for us to just chill. Grant and I've written some blogs that maybe some people thought had some barbs on them. I don't think Grant said anything inappropriate, and I only called Grant 2 or 3 names, not too bad. But no, I mean, it's a good discussion, and I think that's what we need to have. And I'm optimistic that that's going to occur, and this too will pass. And let's hopefully don't turn people's electricity off. And I'm just sorry for all those guys in Ottawa who can't get any Kentucky whiskey. I just hope anyone doesn't have a nervous breakdown, drinking although to be perfectly honest, I only drink Crown, so I only drink Canadian whiskey. So don't cut that off, although I think I have a supply, so I think I'm good.
You'll be all right, Jim.
All right, so Grant, what do you make? Because clearly there's been some antagonistic comments on both sides, and even like you mentioned, Jim, Mark Carney coming in. I mean, he said he's gone to Europe first, which kind of breaks tradition. He said that he's not going to speak to Trump until the disrespectful comments stop, as far as the 51st state talk and all of that. So I mean, it certainly seems like that's shaping up publicly to have more antagonism. But I mean, what do you think of as far as how this is playing out, Grant?
Yeah. So listen, I don't sort of notionally disagree with almost anything Jim says or has said. Other than I feel as though there's a discounting of the consequence of the threat that Trump has made as it relates to the tariffs on Canada and what that will result in the Canadian economy that just does not exist going the other way, right? So, like I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine last night who called me to find out what my thoughts were. He works for a company that sells oatmeal, and 85% of their sales go to the United States. Well, his business goes away tomorrow, right? And he's representative of virtually probably 70% of business in Canada where their primary customer resides in the United States, and a 25% tariff on goods being sold into the United States represents a crushing penalty, short-lived or otherwise, doesn't matter, right? And so the response that any leader of Canada needs to have, and you asked the question, Dave, and I think it's a great one, is this posturing? Well, let me give you a little background on Canadian politics. Trudeau, who has been our prime minister for the last 9 years, and I would suggest in a pretty devastating way has led our country into sort of the abyss, he resigned and was going to be replaced in the next election by a gentleman by the name of Pierre Poilievre, who some Americans might know, who has been called the Trump of the North. He's a little bit brash. He has very much the same political bent to Trump. And it was, as Trudeau was the prime minister, his numbers were 70, something like 55, 60%. That was going to result in 70% of members of parliament being elected conservative. Since this, trade war has been announced, and Trudeau, and then after him, Mark Carney has been able to stand up and say, basically, give the middle finger to Trump and say, I'm representing Canada, not you, and I'm not standing down on this. Carney's now pulled ahead of Poilievre in the polls, which is totally dumbfounding because Carney's policies are going to be exactly the same as Trudeau's, and it's going to take us even further into the abyss. So is it posturing? Yeah, I think there's a lot of it that is posturing, but then a lot of it is we don't know what to, we have to take this threat seriously, right? Americans can perhaps take the Canadian retaliatory threat seriously or not, and Americans will survive, or the pain at least will be felt in very, very particular areas, right? As I said in my post, Canada could create a lot of pain for those that live in the Northeast, and Canada can create a lot of pain for farmers, right? Which happen to be located in the Midwest, and which is the sort of like the locus of Trump's power, right? So for those of you that don't know, potash is a fertilizer. It provides potassium and increases crop yield by about 30%, right? So were Canada to shut off potash, best case scenario is prices just go through the roof of potash. Worst case scenario is farmers don't have potash and their yields go down 30%, and then farmers can't actually make a living. So, again, I'm not suggesting that this is what we want to do. And I would much rather that both countries and the leaders of both countries came to a discussion to have a conversation about where we stand. And Jim's absolutely right. There is an energy policy for North America. There is petroleum or petroleum natural gas. It's a North American game. And the automotive sector, I don't know what's going to happen with the automotive sector if they tariff, because the auto sector cannot function. So anyhow, like my point is that this ought to be negotiated. And if I could just bring up one last thing, Dave, just to maybe reorient this and take it out of the realm of trade, or only trade. And one of, I think Jim mentioned right at the beginning about, Trump's comments about Canada becoming the 51st state, which lots of people throw away as like a throwaway antagonistic comment. Maybe he was trolling Trudeau and calling him Governor Trudeau. But I actually don't think that that's a joke. And I don't think ultimately that the driver of that comment is a joke. And not because I think that Canada ought to be the 51st state. I don't think that's workable in either country. But I do believe that there are really two things that matter to Trump. One is security of the United States. And really, just if we just focus on that, there are two things that matter in the security of the United States. One is access to rare earth minerals. And we all know that Trump really cared about having a mineral contract with Ukraine. And the first thing that leapt into my mind was, wait a second, Canada's like directly north of the United States. Why don't we have a mineral deal with the United States to extract minerals from Canada? There are probably a host of reasons why, mostly regulatory and sort of the perspective of the Canadian government. But Canada is the second largest body in the world. We have untold wealth in terms of mineral resources in our north. It is totally inaccessible to us. And I believe that Trump sees that and believes that there is reason to for the US and Canada to minimally partner, or if he could have total control of it, that would be even more beneficial. So that's point one. Point two would be that the Northwest Passage, which is the body to the north in the Arctic Sea that goes from across the north of Canada, is opening up. It's typically been frozen because it's the Arctic Circle, but it's opening up, and it presents a new waterway for maritime travel that previously has not been accessible because it freezes too much. And access to that and control of that is going to be significant as we move into the second half of this century. And Canada has demonstrated an unwillingness or an inability to come up with a holistic strategy on how that would be controlled, maintained. And I believe that Trump sees that as a major geostrategic problem, given that China and Russia both have made inroads in strategy in the north. And so, all of these things together go to a much broader, like, I actually don't think that our problem is a trade problem. I think we have a geopolitical problem here in Canada. And the trade is being used to force a conversation on these other topics. And I really think that that's where, this conversation ultimately is going to go. And it's going to be short-term pain and hopefully long-term gain for all of us.
Okay. All right. So, Jim, like you mentioned, April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs begin. Clearly a lot of posturing, a lot of stuff going on pre-deadline, pre-game. So how do you see this playing out in terms of what's going to happen between now and April 2nd and then thereafter when the reciprocal tariffs kick in?
I think Grant's discussion of the guy he spoke with last night who called him and had some concerns about his business not being successful going forward. Interesting, I had a discussion yesterday afternoon with a good friend of mine who's a CEO of a $150 million company. And it's a manufacturing company in the United States. and they get substantial raw materials from China and from elsewhere in Asia. Um, they estimate the increase in cost if the Trump tariffs went in would be $7 million. And so a $7 million increase in raw material cost is a substantial hit for a $150 million manufacturing firm in the United States. But in addition to this, this company makes attachments for tractors, mostly Caterpillar and John Deere, and tractor sales due to the uncertainty that exists as a result of all this tariff stuff are down about 15%. And so you have an issue with respect to tariffs of 7 million. You got an issue with respect to sales being down 15%. And then there's also some immigration issues that I don't want to talk about because I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but there's some immigration issues. And so my friend said to me, if Trump is for American manufacturing, what the heck am I? This is not going my way at all. This is really, really going to hurt my business. So I think your friend and my friend are both in the same position. And I advise my friend, hey, stay cool, relax. This isn't going to happen. You're not going to wind up increasing your cost $7 million by tariffs. If you do hit that, there will be a tax grant or a government grant or something to pay for that, and that's going to work out. We're going to have fair, and fair is not you having an increase of cost of 7 million and having these other issues hitting you at the same time. You'd be out of business. He said, absolutely. So I think there are the we're not trying to hurt American manufacturers. We're not trying to hurt Canadian manufacturers. There's certain issues here. The balance of trade thing is a major issue. Yes, it's only 63 billion, but the trend line is not good. Are there issues with electricity and potash? Yeah, we've already talked about the electricity. The potash is also important. Rare earth minerals are more important. Trump is going after 3 pots of rare earth minerals. One is Greenland, one is Ukraine, and one is Canada. He needs to hit 2 out of the 3. So he has to get 2 out of the 3, and that will reduce one of China's trump cards. So Trump has sized up his opposition. His opposition is not Canada. It's not Canada. It's China. Okay. So Trump will do whatever, say whatever with respect to China and with respect to Mexico because he has to win China. Okay. And so what he's doing is he is showing China that he is really tough on this, so tough, in fact, that he would imply that he's going to hurt his friends. And so that's what he's doing. This is about China. This isn't about Canada. Canada is what 7% of our GDP. Okay, they're a small player. I used an analogy on one of my blogs that our 29 trillion is like a 290-pound lineman in football. And China is putting on the line against us 188-pound lineman. This is kind of like the Eagles versus the Chiefs. The Eagles were in the backfield the entire Super Bowl. Poor Mahomes, he was running for his life from the minute the game started. You can't have a 290-pound guy against a 188-pound guy. We got a 290-pound guy against a 2-pound guy. Okay, so we got to be real here. This isn't we do this and you do this and we're going to shut you off and we're going to. You're 2 pounds. Quit trying to act like you weigh 300 pounds. You don't. And so we're friends. We're trying to win the China battle, and so we're working very hard on this. Now, the other thing that we talk about is maritime. What did Trump do with maritime? He said we want to take Panama back. That was posturing. What did he want to do? He already had the North Rock deal underway. And now what we've done is we bought the Western port and the Eastern port, brought them under BlackRock, and BlackRock now has control of the Panama Canal. We have taken that threat away. That was a huge, huge, huge play. China spent billions of dollars on their Belt and Road policy, which included the Panama Canal, and that's been taken away. Trump said in his State of the Union address, we're going to create a shipbuilding department within the executive branch. Why? What's he doing? Well, most ships in the world are made in China, both Navy, military, and commercial. Most chassis, most containers are made in China. Most ship repairs are done in China. We, the US, Canada, England, all of us have fallen asleep at the switch since the 1970s. So this isn't a Biden Trudeau thing. We've been screwing this thing up since the 1970s. And what we've done is we've given our maritime away. So the first thing we got to do is we got to protect the Panama Canal. The second thing we need to do is we got to control the North Passage, because goodness knows the Chinese and Russian are running up all over the place over there. And that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable for Canada's sovereignty. It's not acceptable for our sovereignty. So what we need to do is we need to work together on that. So Grant's point is there's other issues. Yes, there's other issues. Is fentanyl an issue? Absolutely not. I mean, what, the 4 suitcases or something? I mean, I don't know how much fentanyl's come from Canada, but under Biden, that was something that they brought in every day in the trunk of a car without even just getting waved through. I mean, for crying out loud. So, it's not about the just the trade, but trade is how we're going to negotiate. So he's using trade to talk about fentanyl. He's using trade to talk about open borders. He's using fentanyl to talk about the North Passage. He hasn't started that discussion yet, but Grant's absolutely right. He is leading up to it with the Panama Canal, with the shipbuilding, and so that's all happening because he knows what, excuse the phrase, what trump cards China is holding, and he is coming after those cards before the game starts. Trump got to win the rare earth mineral thing, because that's going to kill us with respect to us creating more chips, more AI, and more advanced technology, which is what we do in the US. So what we need to do is just stay loose, understand our positioning, and then stay loose. I mean, it's kind of like, the US-Canadian hockey game. Guess what? The best hockey player in the world was on the ice in the overtime, and he scored. God bless Connor. I mean, I love to watch that man play hockey. He's a great hockey player, and he's from Canada. So God bless Canada. I mean, I think that's marvelous. And they should have won that game. They played better. And hopefully US can develop and become, hopefully James Tompkins, my grandson, winds up playing on one of those teams at some point. He's 16-year-old now, and they're already scouting him. But, boy, if he could play on a Canadian team, would that be awesome? That would be just totally awesome. So I think where we are is what we need to do is just take a breath and look at this realistically, and don't antagonize a bully. It doesn't help. What we need to do is we need to sit back and say, okay, we don't like when you said this. I mean, I'm not saying roll over and play dead. That doesn't work. But we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do. But don't start threatening us, because that's not going to win. That's not what Mexico's doing. Mexico's playing it much smarter than Canada is at this point.
Okay, Grant, where do you see this going in the coming weeks, especially once we hit April 2nd and the reciprocal tariffs?
So, I guess my overarching point would be it's hard to know, right? And the ambit of what it could be is pretty wide. Like, it could be from anything from, hey, we're going to stand down on the reciprocal tariffs, and we're going to put everything off until we renegotiate something. And I think everybody is the level of discontent and uncertainty would decrease dramatically if this was a negotiated thing. So it could be a nothing burger, or it could be actually quite dramatic, and the tariffs could be quite punitive. What that requires is, if you're a company, if you're, Jim's friend who spoke to him yesterday, or my friend that spoke to me yesterday, what it ultimately means for you, if we want to get a little bit practical in the matter, is that um, you need to have very, very good control of what your business looks like and the data that is in your business so that you could make informed decisions as to the best way to operate. And most companies in today's world actually don't have that ability to be able to understand where they are today and then scenario plan as to how can I survive or how can I pivot into new scenarios. So, Tompkins Ventures, and I'll let Jim really speak more to that, but Tompkins Ventures is designed to do exactly that. They're a bunch of consultants organized to help companies understand where they are, how do they play in the international trade world, and specifically how should their supply chains be oriented and organized such that you can deal in a world of a great deal of uncertainty. I think the one thing I can say with a great deal of confidence today is that the world for the next 4 years or 3.5 years is going to be a reasonably uncertain one. And so, Tompkins Ventures is probably a good group of people to know. And for our part at Third Wave, we're a technology solution that helps companies understand specifically what they do and how their international operations operates. And we're the companies that have tools like Third Wave are much better positioned to be able to deal with the uncertainty that could exist in future decisions. How do we reorient our world? How do we pivot to it to address the new world or the new condition of the world, which is uncertainty?
Okay, appreciate that. And then Jim, we'll wrap up with you. So just tell us again about Tompkins Ventures and how you can help people, particularly that are struggling with the uncertainty around the tariffs.
Oh, gee, I'm intimidated because Grant did such a good job with that. I might screw it up. Um, but I think Grant is right. I think that the uncertainty is huge. My last book on insightful leadership, surfing the waves of organizational excellence. That book is about the reality that uncertainty is certain. Okay, now, um, given what's happened over the last 2 months, I guess I could put that in capital letters. Uncertainty is really, really certain. And we are dealing with that. And if we don't have the tools and the methodology and the technology to make intelligent decisions where we can deploy optionality. So we need to deploy optionality. Grant's technology does a good job of giving you the scenarios, the options. And so this happens, how do we respond? This happens, how do we respond? And I think what we're going to have is we're going to have a negotiated settlement that the U.S. feels a little bit hurt, Canada feels a little hurt, Mexico feels a little hurt, but we decide we're going to make it happen, and North America is going to continue to be the light of the world, and some of us are going to wear hats that say "Make U.S. Great Again." Some should wear the hats that "Make Canada Great Again." And we should have hats that say "Make Mexico Great Again." And I think it'd be great if someone kind of saved the cost of hats and said, "Let's make North America great again," because that's what we need to do. We all of us, Mexico, U.S., Canada, are not where they should be in the order of the world. So, yeah, I think we're going to have some good negotiation. I think we got to make sure that we don't trip over ourselves on the way to the altar. But I think we're going to get married, and it's going to be a happy marriage, and we're going to be able to overcome communism and allow free countries of the world, U.S., Canada, Mexico, many locations in South America, many places in Europe, some places in Africa, some places in Asia, and it's going to be a huge day for free and fair trade, and I very much look forward to that. I thank you, Dave. I thank you, Grant. I think good discussion, and I think I hope people who watch this understand And I don't want anyone to say, "Gee, did Grant win or did Jim win?" No, no, no. It ain't about Grant and me winning. Although Dave did guarantee he was going to buy me a glass of wine, but no, he didn't. But I think what we need to do is we need to say, "Hey, we all going to win," and that's what the name of the game is. And so, if someone calls your name or you don't like it, just swallow and get on with it. And let's hopefully have leaders that smart enough and wise enough to understand that it's North America is important. It's important for the whole world.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you both, Jim, Grant. Excellent discussion. I'm sure the audience got a lot of value, and yeah, greatly appreciate your time on this.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks,
All
Jim.
right.
Very much appreciated. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Dave.
All right. We'll see you next time.